Millionaire came to court for business, but twin girls cried out, "Our mom, his ex, is in jail." What did he do? Hey, beautiful souls, welcome to Beyond Color Stories. I'm your storyteller, James. I hope you're doing wonderfully well today. Let me ask you something. Are you already part of James's family? No? Well, my friend, it only takes a second. Just hit that subscribe button and become part of this growing, beautiful, loving community that believes in stories touching hearts beyond boundaries. Tell me in the comments below, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to know where my voice is reaching you. Now, I have just one request. Don't skip even a single second of the story you're about to hear. I promise, this will touch your soul in the deepest way. The emotions, the twists, the passion. It's all here, waiting just for you. Stay with me till the very end, and let this tale wrap around your heart like a warm hug, sending you a short but heartfelt prayer. May love find you where you are, may peace fill your heart, and may stories like these bring light to your spirit. Now, let's dive straight into the story. Your heart's about to remember what true love feels like. Let's go. V. Brooke Carter was a man born into unimaginable wealth and an empire so vast that the name Carter Enterprises echoed through the business world like royalty. But despite the cold steel of boardrooms and the endless flashes of paparazzi lights, his heart remained untouched by love for most of his 32 years, until the day his eyes fell on a woman who didn't belong to his world, but somehow completed his soul in a way he never knew was missing, and her name was Aroshi, a stunningly beautiful black woman with radiant brown, smooth skin that glowed under sunlight like polished caramel, eyes so soft they could quiet the harshest storm within him, and a heart so warm and pure it made him question how someone so grounded and gracious could exist in a world so obsessed with superficial masks and cruel hierarchies. For she came from a life so far removed from champagne galas and billion-dollar mergers that even the idea of speaking to a man like Brooke Carter would have once seemed like an unreachable dream. Yet fate, bold and unrelenting, crossed their paths in the most unexpected of places. A quiet university charity gala where Brooke had been invited as a guest speaker, and where Aroshi, a volunteer coordinator with a gentle voice and fierce intelligence, had corrected a minor organizational mistake with such composure and clarity that it not only fixed the issue but captivated Brooke in a way no woman ever had. And as he watched her speak, eyes dancing with conviction and lips curving with quiet strength, something in him shifted. A feeling he had never known awakened, raw, real, and impossible to ignore. That night, Brooke didn't return to his penthouse with the same indifference he usually wore after events. Instead, he found himself replaying every word she'd said, every gesture she'd made, the graceful way she walked, and the way her laughter had sounded like music in the noisy banquet hall. And without fully realizing it, he began searching for ways to be involved in that same charity, donating anonymously at first, then more publicly, and using every excuse to visit the place where she worked, even if just for a glimpse of her smile. And slowly, the casual conversations turned into shared coffees, which turned into long evening walks under city lights where Aroshi, in all her unguarded beauty, spoke about her dreams of building safe community centers for children, her love for literature, and her fear that the world was too often unfair to women who looked like her, who came from nothing but dared to dream everything. And Brooke listened, not just with his ears but with his soul. And the more he learned, the more he realized she wasn't just someone he admired. She was someone he needed, someone who awakened the man beneath the billionaire, someone who made him laugh for no reason and see color in places he'd only known gray. Their romance bloomed quietly, deliberately, with Brooke shielding her from the ruthless eyes of society and media, knowing well that the world would not understand, knowing that his mother, Stella Carter, a woman forged in high society's icy expectations, who wore cruelty like pearls around her neck and judged with the elegance of a queen trained to protect bloodlines, would never accept Orochi, not because of her heart or intellect, but because of her skin, her origin, her refusal to bow to elitist norms. And still, Brooke proposed one rainy evening in the middle of a public garden, dropping to his knees on the wet ground without caring for his $1,000 suit or the cameras that might catch the moment, holding out a delicate emerald ring that matched the earth tones of her skin, whispering not grand declarations but a simple truth. You are my beginning, and I want no end without you. And Orochi, tears streaming down her cheeks, trembling from a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming love, said yes with a kiss that tasted like spring after a long, cruel winter. Their wedding was nothing short of a fairy tale, but it was done quietly, intentionally intimate, without grand fanfare or media frenzy, for Brooke had insisted that this day be about their love and not about the family name, and in a sunlit garden surrounded by fragrant white orchids, with only their closest trusted friends in attendance, Brooke stood in a light gray suit that clung perfectly to his tall frame, his striking blue eyes never leaving Orochi as she walked down the aisle in a cream silk gown that floated around her like a dream, her long curls cascading down her back, skin glowing with love. And when they exchanged vows, his voice cracked with emotion as he promised her not palaces or yachts, but loyalty, respect, laughter in sorrow, and strength in every storm. And when she vowed to stand beside him, no matter the backlash, to build not just a life with him, but a purpose, a legacy of compassion and truth. There wasn't a dry eye among the guests, but the one person whose presence lingered like a cold gust of wind was his mother, Stella Carter, whose pale pink Chanel dress could not hide the frost in her eyes or the tightly clenched fists behind her polite applause. Stella had arrived late to the wedding, offering no hugs, no smiles, only a curt nod of acknowledgement toward the bride, and though she raised her champagne glass in the toasts, she never once looked at her son with joy, for in her heart she saw this marriage not as a union of love, but as a threat to legacy, a stain upon the pristine Carter bloodline she'd spent decades preserving. And as she sat among the guests, surrounded by whispers and forced smiles, she kept her gaze trained on Orochi, not with admiration, but with a calculated stillness, as if studying her enemy. And behind the painted grace of her expression brewed a storm of bitterness, a fury she would never show openly, for Stella was not the kind to scream or throw tantrums. No, her hatred was quieter, more dangerous, like a slow-acting poison that waits for its moment to destroy everything from the inside. And though she smiled and made small talk and even complimented the bride's dress in front of others, Brooke knew his mother too well, and he saw through the performance, felt the chill beneath her words. But he chose to ignore it that day, choosing instead to focus on Oroshi's hand in his, her soft fingers laced through his like lifelines intertwined. Their first dance was under a canopy of fairy lights, with a live violinist playing a soulful melody that made time itself slow down. And as Brooke held Orochi close, their foreheads touching, lips brushing with soft whispers of love, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude that he'd followed his heart, that he hadn't let tradition or elitist expectation rob him of the woman who now made him feel more alive than years of success ever had. And Orochi, for her part, danced like she'd never known fear, her head resting against his chest as though she'd finally found home, even as silent daggers of judgment shot at her from certain corners of the garden. And when the night ended, when the last guest had left and the candles were extinguished, Brooke and Arashi stood alone beneath the stars, hands clasped, and promised each other that no matter what storms may come, their love would remain unshaken. But unbeknownst to them, The storm had already begun to brew inside the mansion they would soon call home, for Stella had returned to her estate with a vow of her own that she would find a way, quietly and elegantly, to unravel this marriage and reclaim her son's future from what she saw as an emotional, social, and cultural threat disguised in silk and grace. And so, while Brooke and Orochi honeymooned in the lavender fields of southern France, walking hand in hand through ancient villages, tasting sweet wines, and losing themselves in sunlit mornings and star-filled nights, Stella Carter began assembling her web, meeting with old family allies, calling in favors from elite circles, and planting seeds of doubt in high places, though never once confronting her son directly, for Stella believed in the long game, in the art of manipulation over confrontation, and while she smiled at her staff and carried on with social appearances, she studied every detail of Oroshi's past, her family, her upbringing, her associations, determined to find a crack in the foundation of this seemingly perfect love story, while Brooke remained blissfully unaware, writing Orochi poems in his journal, tracing the outline of her smile on his sketchpad, and telling her that every morning with her felt like waking up in a dream he never wanted to end. Thus, the marriage that shook the Carter mansion was not just about a billionaire falling for a woman from humble beginnings. It was a declaration, a rebellion against expectations, a love that dared to exist in a world designed to crush such unions before they bloomed. And though Brooke's heart burned brightly with passion and Aroshi's soul shined with devotion, they had unknowingly walked into a battlefield where love would be tested not just by time, but by blood, pride, and a mother's silent wrath. The warm days of honeymoon laughter faded into the reality of a married life full of promise, and the Carter mansion, once a fortress of cold silence, now echoed with the soft hum of joy as Orochi moved gracefully through its ornate halls, adding gentle touches of warmth to the otherwise sterile space, folding fresh linens with her delicate hands, arranging fresh flowers near the library window where sunlight poured in, and leaving handwritten notes of love on Brooke's desk just to surprise him during long conference calls. And though Brooke was often tangled in meetings and corporate calls, he always made time to return to her, finding refuge in her embrace at night, their bodies entwined like ivy on ancient stone, sharing whispered dreams under the soft folds of moonlight. And it was during one of those nights, beneath the velvet sky stretched across their bedroom's glass ceiling, that Orochi nervously placed Brooke's hand over her stomach and told him in a trembling voice, "You're going to be a father." And the world seemed to still in that moment, as Brooke's blue eyes welled up with uncontainable joy, his hands trembling as he kissed her belly, then her lips, then her forehead, whispering promises between each kiss, that he would protect them, love them endlessly, and raise a child in a home full of affection, not control, not cruelty, but warmth, truth, and freedom. But just as life had begun to write a new chapter for them, an old thread of darkness slithered in quietly, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and it arrived like an unexpected chill. The morning Brooke received a high-priority summons for an urgent expansion project in Paris, one that couldn't be postponed and demanded 2 full months of his presence overseas. And though his heart twisted at the thought of leaving his pregnant wife behind, Orochi, ever supportive, smiled softly, placed her hands over his, and said, "Go, love. Build the world we talked about. I'll be here waiting, loving you from home." And Brooke, despite the unease gnawing at his chest, kissed her deeply and held her for what felt like eternity, burying his face in her neck as though trying to memorize her scent, her warmth, her existence, before finally boarding the private jet with a promise that he would call every night and return sooner than planned if she ever felt unsafe or unwell. But what neither of them knew was that the very moment his plane lifted off the Carter estate's private runway, The mask Stella Carter wore for the last several weeks slipped, and beneath it was not just disapproval, but a plan meticulously crafted, soaked in venom, waiting for Brooke to be out of reach. Aroshi's first morning without Brooke began with soft nausea and a craving for strawberries, and she wrapped her robe around her growing figure, humming to herself as she walked down to the sunroom, unaware that the serenity of the mansion would crack before the day ended, because as she reached the dining hall, she found Stella already seated, her posture as regal as ever, sipping tea with the poise of someone who had long rehearsed confrontations in her mind, and when Aroshi greeted her gently with a smile, Stella's reply was not words, but a long, cold look that stripped the warmth from the room. And in that moment, Aroshi sensed something dark brewing beneath the silence. But she stayed composed, gently pulling out a chair, trying to bridge the invisible chasm between them, until Stella finally spoke, voice sharp as glass. "You really think carrying his child makes you family?" And Aroshi's breath caught in her throat, not because of the words, but because of the hatred behind them, pure, ancient, entitled hatred that no longer wore disguise. Before Aroshi could even process the weight of that question, Stella pushed back her chair and stood, her voice rising like a whip. "You fooled my son with your soft eyes and your tragic background, but I was never convinced. Not for 1 second. I've seen women like you before, crawling their way into power through wombs and weddings." And Aroshi stood too, hand instinctively resting over her belly, a soft protective gesture. But Stella's eyes flicked to that small movement like a predator sensing weakness, and she stepped forward, lowering her voice into a venomous whisper. "That child is not your shield. Don't think for a second it earns you a place in this family." And with each word, Aroshi's pulse quickened, not from fear for herself, but for the fragile life blooming within her, a life she had just begun to dream about. Tiny hands, warm lullabies, Brooke's laugh echoed in a smaller voice, and she looked at Stella with quiet strength and replied, "I didn't marry your son for power. I married him because he loved me, and I love him." But Stella only scoffed, her cruel smile returning like frost, and with a flick of her wrist summoned 2 staff members, once loyal to Brooke but long indebted to the matriarch, and gave them one simple order: escort her out. Now. At first, Aroshi thought it was a bluff, some dramatic threat to instill fear, but when one of the staff members, a man who once brought her ginger tea during morning sickness, reached for her arm, her eyes widened in disbelief, and her voice cracked. "You can't be serious. Brooke will never—" But Stella interrupted coldly. "Brooke is gone. You're no one here without him." And though Aroshi tried to protest, to reason, her voice fell on deaf ears, and within minutes she found herself standing on the stone steps of the mansion, robe clutched around her. No suitcase, no phone, no wallet. Just the echo of a slammed door behind her and the weight of despair crashing over her shoulders, and as the cold wind wrapped around her trembling body, she reached down, cupping her belly and whispering, "I'm still here, baby. I won't let anything happen to you." And the tears came, not in sobs, but in heavy, silent drops, sliding down her cheeks as she stepped off the estate grounds barefoot, carrying not only the growing child inside her, but the unbearable betrayal of a world that never truly welcomed her. No one from the staff called Brooke. Stella made sure of that. She intercepted every call, silenced every whisper, painted lies about Aroshi leaving on her own accord to find comfort with her family, saying she needed time away. And Brooke, though suspicious at times, was buried under layers of tight schedules, board meetings, and contractual negotiations. And when he asked to FaceTime Aroshi, Stella offered excuses. "She's resting. She's at the doctor. The signal's bad at the estate." Each lie wrapped in just enough truth to keep him confused but not alarmed, And meanwhile, Arashi found herself wandering unfamiliar streets, rejected even by some shelters that doubted her story, clinging to the last few kind words she remembered from Brooke, letting them replay in her mind like sacred scripture as she finally collapsed in a tiny, neglected apartment offered by an elderly woman who recognized the desperation in her eyes and, without questions, offered her safety and tea. In those first nights alone, Oroshi barely slept, her hands constantly on her stomach, singing quiet lullabies she barely remembered from childhood, whispering to her unborn child that everything would be okay, that even if they had no luxury, no estate, no soft mattress, they had each other. And each morning she woke with a plan to contact Brooke, only to be faced with the cruel reality. Her phone had been taken, her accounts locked, her identity silenced by a woman with too much power and no heart, and even when she wrote letters and tried sending them through mail, she feared they were intercepted, destroyed before reaching Brooke's hands. And yet, she didn't give up. Instead, she began documenting everything, each word Stella had said, each moment she'd been threatened, and slowly, painfully, she began building her own proof. Because somewhere deep within her heart, beneath the exhaustion and betrayal, lived the fierce belief that Brooke would come for her, not because of pity, but because their love was real. And real love didn't vanish with absence. Back at the mansion, Stella resumed life as if nothing had changed, hosting brunches, attending galas, smiling in public while quietly rewriting history behind closed doors, ensuring that anyone who asked about Oroshi received vague, curated answers. But one thing Stella failed to calculate was the resilience of the very woman she tried to erase. For Arashi, in her quiet strength, was not just surviving. She was preparing, waiting for the right time, for the day her truth would be heard, her child would be safe, and Brooke would finally uncover the cruelty hidden in the velvet halls of the home he once believed was sanctuary. The sharp scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint mildew of aging walls lingered in the narrow hallways of the women's shelter, where Oroshi now found herself, its peeling paint and rusting hinges a stark contrast to the golden chandeliers and marble floors she once walked barefoot in. But this place, though cold and worn, offered her the one thing the Carter mansion never truly gave her: safety from the woman who tried to erase her. She arrived with nothing but the fraying robe still tied around her, carrying no belongings, no pride, just her swollen belly and eyes that refused to cry anymore. The shelter matron, a middle-aged woman with a tough voice but kind eyes named Sister Helen, didn't ask too many questions. She simply gave Oroshi a thin blanket, a pillow that smelled faintly of lavender, and a corner bunk near the back of the common room. The other women there, each with their own stories of pain and silence, didn't pry either. They recognized the haunted look in her eyes, the look of someone who'd trusted the wrong people and paid for it dearly. Oroshi didn't speak much during those first few days. She would sit near the window for hours, tracing her fingers along her belly, whispering songs and promises to her unborn child, though even the sound of her own voice sometimes frightened her. Nights were hardest, the creaks of old floors, the distant coughs, and the sobbing of others in the dark reminded her she wasn't alone in her suffering. Yet it also made her feel smaller, more fragile, as though grief were contagious and pressing in from all sides. Her mornings began before the sun, not from sleep, but from the ache in her back and the restlessness in her thoughts. She helped clean the shared kitchen, prepared trays for new arrivals, folded laundry, and read old, donated baby books in the shelter library, soaking in every word with the desperation of someone trying to prepare for the unknown without anyone to guide her. Every flutter in her womb was a reminder that time was racing forward, and each kick made her grit her teeth harder, because she didn't have time to fall apart. The shelter didn't offer much, but its walls gave her space to plan. She started journaling every day, not for therapy, but to capture every detail of her pregnancy in case her children ever asked what life was like before they were born. She wrote about Brooke, not bitterly but lovingly, as if explaining to the little life inside her why their father wasn't there, even though she knew it wasn't his fault. She still dreamt of his voice sometimes, the way he used to whisper, "My miracle," into the curve of her neck. But those memories were too dangerous to linger on. Instead, she channeled her love into preparing for motherhood, accepting donated baby clothes with grateful smiles, organizing every tiny sock and cap with trembling fingers. One evening, while folding a donated yellow onesie, Aroshi felt a sudden, searing pain shoot through her spine, so sharp it stole her breath, and when she tried to stand, her knees buckled, forcing her down to the cold floor, as the other women rushed to her side, shouting for Sister Helen. The labor came early and hard, and as the ambulance tore through the rainy streets toward the county hospital, Aroshi clutched the arm of a nurse with one hand and gripped her swollen belly with the other, her eyes wild with pain and panic. Not because she feared death, but because she couldn't bear the thought of her babies entering the world without love waiting to greet them. The delivery room was stark, buzzing with urgency as the doctors prepped hurriedly, recognizing the signs of twins and the early contractions tightening faster than expected. Through ragged screams and the thick blur of tears, Aroshi fought, gritting her teeth as her body shook with each wave, whispering prayers between gasps, not to survive, but to hold her babies, even just once. Hours felt like days, and just when her strength seemed to wane, the room filled with the most powerful sound she'd ever heard. Two cries, not one, piercing the sterile air like declarations of survival. Twin girls, two little miracles born in the midst of pain and loss, their tiny lungs announcing their arrival with the defiance Aroshi never knew she passed on. The nurses placed the first baby on her chest, and then the second, and time froze as Aroshi stared at their wrinkled faces, identical yet distinct, their warm skin resting against hers like puzzle pieces, finally fitting into place. Tears streamed down her face, and with a trembling voice she whispered their names, Lena and Bina, as if naming them would anchor them to the world, to hope, to love. The following days were a blur of exhaustion, feedings, and quiet weeping. The hospital discharged her quickly, offering a modest diaper bag and little else, and the shelter made space for her and the twins, turning an old storage room into a makeshift nursery with tattered curtains, borrowed cribs, and a string of fairy lights a teenage volunteer brought in to make the babies smile. Hiroshi thanked everyone quietly, always with a bowed head, never revealing her full name, always afraid that Stella's reach might somehow extend into this fragile corner of peace. She never accessed her bank accounts, knowing Stella had them frozen, and never tried to contact Brooke, not because she didn't long to, but because every time she imagined Stella discovering her whereabouts, she remembered the way that woman's voice sounded when she threatened her unborn child. If she had to choose between reuniting with Brooke and keeping her daughter safe, she chose safety without hesitation. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and though Aroshi lived in anonymity, she began to grow stronger in silence. She learned how to soothe both twins when they cried in harmony, how to warm bottles using shelter stoves, how to swaddle with one hand while holding the other child with her hip. Despite sleepless nights, aching limbs, and the ever-present weight of fear, Aroshi never let bitterness enter her heart. She kissed Lena's cheeks every morning and rocked Bina to sleep each night, whispering bedtime stories that always ended with the same promise. You are not broken, you are not alone, and you are not unloved. She watched as their eyes began to focus, as their fingers reached out for hers, and each milestone they hit, every coo, every roll, every smile, became a medal she pinned silently on her soul, proof that she was doing it, that despite being abandoned, hunted, and erased, she was a mother, and she was enough. She wrote down everything, their first giggle, their favorite lullabies, how Bina liked to sleep sideways and Lena refused to nap unless her mother hummed a specific tune. And though no one knew her story at the shelter in full, the women there began to admire her quiet strength, the way she never asked for much, always gave more than she had, and held both babies through flu season without complaint. Aroshi, to them, became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of what it meant to endure with grace. One rainy evening, as thunder cracked above the leaking roof and the shelter's power flickered, Aroshi sat in the nursery room with both girls in her arms, cradling them against her chest while lightning flashed outside. The fear of discovery still haunted her, and with each rumble she imagined the sound of Stella's footsteps, of police storming in under false orders, of Brooke appearing too late. But when she looked down at the two tiny faces nestled against her, she didn't feel helpless. She felt powerful. For the first time since she'd been cast out, she felt her own roots take hold, not in mansions, not in gold, but in the fire of motherhood. She didn't need a last name or a title to matter. She had created life, protected it, nurtured it, and she would continue to, even if it meant staying hidden forever. And so, Hiroshi began to build a new identity, quietly. She took on small sewing jobs for neighbors near the shelter, learned how to mend old dresses and repurpose baby clothes, earning enough to buy a second-hand stroller and a pack of pacifiers that jingled softly as she pushed her daughters down cracked sidewalks each morning. Every time she passed a newspaper stand and saw Brooke's name in the headlines, Carter Global expands to Asia, Brooke Carter receives humanitarian award, she'd pause only for a moment, her fingers tightening around the stroller handle, then move on without looking back. She had chosen this life, not because it was easy, but because her daughters deserved peace. And somewhere deep inside her heart, she clung to the faint hope that one day, when the time was right, truth would emerge like dawn, and Brooke would know not just that she had loved him, but that she had given him two daughters he never got to hold. But until that day, she would remain the quiet storm, a mother with nothing left to lose, everything to protect, and a heart stronger than anything the Carter Empire could ever build. 4 years had passed like scattered autumn leaves carried by bitter winds, each one a day filled with struggle, survival, and silent longing. Hiroshi no longer looked like the fragile girl who once trembled outside a mansion's gate. Now she carried herself with quiet dignity and a strength etched into the lines on her hands, earned through endless labor and tireless love. Her daughters, Lena and Bina, now 4 years old, were the reflection of her hope, bright-eyed, curious, and inseparable, their bond as twin sisters as unbreakable as Arashi's determination to keep them safe. Every morning began with soft giggles and little hands reaching for her cheeks, and every night ended with lullabies sung under dim lights, her voice full of warmth even when her body screamed in exhaustion. Aroshi worked long hours cleaning neighborhood homes and mending old dresses for next to nothing, scraping together every rupee, every dime, just to afford milk, pencils, and second-hand shoes that were always slightly too big. She never complained, she never pitied herself, but she carried something heavy within her chest, a knot of unspoken grief that pulsed like a wound that never healed. Brooke's face still lingered in her memories, not as a dream, but as a question left unanswered. Did he search for her? Did he mourn the wife who vanished without a trace? Did he know he had daughters with smiles just like his, with eyes that sparkled the way his once had when he looked at her? For years she didn't dare seek answers, her fear of Stella's wrath forever hanging over her like a blackened sky. But on the morning of Lena and Bina's 4th birthday, while the girls played with handmade paper crowns and a single shared cupcake with pink icing, something in Aroshi shifted. A pull in her heart, too, strong to ignore, a mother's ache for truth. She sat at the edge of her small bed in the shelter, her fingers trembling as she clutched a cheap plastic phone bought from her recent earnings. Her hands shook not because of weakness, but because of the hope she tried so long to bury. She stared at the screen, the familiar number long memorized despite the years, and pressed call with the kind of breath one takes before diving into deep waters. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she stood near the window, watching her daughters laugh over crayons on the floor, their innocence giving her courage. And then someone picked up. But it wasn't Brooke. The voice that pierced through the speaker sent ice down Aroshi's spine. It was Stella. Her tone was clipped, cold, and instantly poisonous, like venom disguised as velvet. "Who is this?" she snapped. Aroshi's voice faltered for a moment, but then she whispered, "It's me." "Aroshi, please, I need to talk to Brooke. It's urgent." There was a long silence on the other end, and then came the sound Aroshi had heard before, the cruel hiss of rage hidden behind practiced elegance. "You dare call here again?" Stella barked. "After all these years, you think I'd let you near him? Near this family?" Aroshi swallowed hard, her fingers digging into her thigh to keep from breaking. "Please," she said softly. "He deserves to know. I never stopped loving him. I just want to explain. I want him to know about his daughters." The word daughters hung heavy in the air, and for a moment there was only silence. Then Stella's fury exploded. She screamed obscenities, accused Aroshi of lying, of trying to destroy the family again. She called her filth, a fraud, a gold digger who had no place in their world. "If you ever try to contact him again, I'll make sure you disappear for good," Stella threatened, before hanging up so violently it echoed into Aroshi's soul. The screen went dark. The air in the room turned to glass, too sharp to breathe. Aroshi sat frozen, her heart thudding painfully against her ribs, her mouth dry, eyes unfocused. She had tried. She had reached out across the void, and the void had crushed her hope with a fist wearing diamonds. She didn't tell her daughters what happened. She wiped her face, stood up, and joined them on the floor, drawing stars beside their stick figures with hands that trembled. That night, she tucked them into their little beds, kissed their foreheads, and whispered birthday wishes with a smile that cost her everything. But fate, once again, had its own twisted agenda. The next morning, before the shelter even opened its kitchen, 2 police officers walked in, their uniforms crisp, their eyes stern. They asked for Aroshi by name, not the nickname she used at the shelter, but her real name, the one only a few people still knew. "Ma'am, you're under arrest," one of them said coldly, holding up forged documents and a warrant. "You've been reported for theft, jewelry stolen from a private residence. We have a witness and a statement." Aroshi's breath caught. "What?" she whispered. I've never... This must be a mistake." But they didn't listen. They handcuffed her in front of her children, their little eyes wide with fear as they clung to Sister Helen, screaming for their mother, reaching for her with tiny hands. "Please, Mommy didn't do anything," Bina wailed, and Lena sobbed uncontrollably. The sight of their tear-streaked faces broke Aroshi in a way no betrayal ever had. "Please," she begged the officers, "at least let me say goodbye. Please." But the officers pulled her away, ignoring her cries and the shelter staff's protests. The last thing Aroshi saw before the police car door slammed shut was her daughters' faces pressed against the glass window, their palms on the pane, watching her disappear once again. The jail cell was cold and metallic, the stench of urine and despair soaking into the concrete walls. Aroshi sat there, numb, staring at the floor, her mind echoing with Stella's voice and the memory of her daughter's cries. She didn't speak to the other inmates. She barely touched the food. Every hour that passed was a year in her mind, every tick of the wall clock a reminder that she had been stolen from her children again, not by poverty, not by accident, but by a woman's deliberate cruelty. She didn't know how long she'd be locked away. No lawyer came. No bail was offered. The system had been rigged before she even picked up the phone. Meanwhile, back at the shelter, Sister Helen took the girls into her care, their small voices asking every few hours when their mother would return. "She's just away for a little while," Helen whispered, unable to explain the full truth. Lena grew quiet, clinging to Bina more tightly. Bina, ever the bold one, declared that when she grew up, she'd rescue their mother with a sword and a horse, just like the stories they made up at night. The shelter staff did their best, gave the girls warm meals, kept their drawings safe, wrapped them in extra blankets, but nothing could replace the warmth of Aroshi's embrace. The girls began drawing pictures of their mother in prison bars, not fully understanding what it meant, but knowing she was gone again. And this time it felt worse than the last. And so Aroshi sat in silence behind bars, the walls closing in, her body aching, but her spirit refusing to shatter. She thought of her daughters constantly, how they liked their apples sliced, how they held hands while they slept, how they always insisted she wear the paper crowns they made her. She thought of Brooke, too, now more than ever, not out of longing, but out of a mother's fury. She didn't blame him for not knowing. She blamed herself for trusting fate, but something inside her reignited. She had survived worse. She had carried life through storms. She had built a world out of ashes. And now, as steel bars held her back, her mind began forging a new promise, not just of survival, but of justice. Because this time the fire in her heart wasn't just about love, it was about reclaiming her voice, her truth, and one day, her daughters. The clang of prison bars echoed through Arashi's ears as she sat in the corner of the dim holding cell, her fingers wrapped tightly around the frayed edge of her thin blanket. Days had become indistinguishable, a gray loop of silence broken only by the occasional clatter of a guard's boots or the distant cries of another inmate. But somewhere beyond that steel and sorrow, fate stirred restlessly. In a different part of the city, the morning sun slanted through the tall glass of Carter Industries' top floor, casting a golden sheen on Brooke Carter's sleek suit as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. His features, now sharper with age and stress, carried a distant melancholy that never truly left him since Aroshi's disappearance. He told himself he had moved on, that he had accepted she left by choice, that she had vanished for her own reasons. But in the quiet moments when the world around him dimmed, his soul still ached with confusion. That day, he had a scheduled hearing over a land dispute regarding one of his urban development properties, something trivial to him in the larger scheme of business, but mandatory nonetheless. He entered the towering city courthouse with his lawyer at his side, his presence as commanding as ever. Tall, refined, with those familiar storm blue eyes that once searched rooms for a woman he loved with reckless abandon. As he passed through the marble-floored corridors, his mind drifted absently to the past, to laughter in sunlit rooms, to the gentle way Aroshi used to whisper his name when she thought he was asleep. Outside the courthouse, just as the city's pulse began to quicken with mid-morning haste, two small girls walked slowly, holding hands beside a shelter assistant named Clara. Lena and Bina, dressed in clean but worn dresses, each held a folded drawing pressed tightly against their chests. They had been invited to participate in a Children's Day sketch event inside the Civic Hall across the court building, an opportunity Sister Helen thought would give them a break from the heaviness of their days without their mother. But fate, quiet and watchful, had carved a different plan for the morning. As they reached the courthouse steps, a gust of wind caught Bina's drawing, pulling it from her small hands and sending it floating like a butterfly toward the stairs. Both girls ran after it, laughing for a brief moment, until they froze. Time stopped. There, walking down the grand stairwell in a navy suit that shimmered faintly beneath the sun, was the man from their dreams, the face from the photo their mother showed them every night, the one they memorized without ever meeting. Brooke, their father. He looked exactly as their mother described, strong, elegant, kind-eyed. Lena gasped, clutching her sister's hand tighter. "It's him," she whispered. "It's really him." Bina's lips trembled, her heart beating so hard it nearly hurt. Without thinking, they sprinted forward, past Clara, who called after them in confusion. "Daddy!" they cried in unison, their small voices echoing off the courthouse stone. Brooke turned instinctively at the call. He blinked. Two little girls were running toward him, arms outstretched, their eyes filled with tears and an emotion too deep for strangers. His heart stuttered as they reached him, grabbing his hands, pressing their tiny fingers against his palms. "Daddy, it's us," Lena sobbed. "Our mom. She's in jail. Your wife. Our mommy." Brooke's world tilted. His breath caught as he stared down at the two girls, mirror images of each other, with brown, smooth skin like Aroshi's and big, innocent eyes that had a haunting familiarity. He knelt slowly, instinct overriding logic, placing one hand gently on each of their trembling shoulders. "What? What did you say?" he asked softly, his voice thick, nearly lost. "Who are you? Who told you to say this?" But the moment he said it, guilt crashed into his chest like a wave. These weren't actors. These were children. Real. Breathing. His. Bina reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded photo of Brooke, the one Aroshi gave them. The photo torn at the edge, but with his smile still clear. "She told us to remember," she sniffled. "She said to love you even if you didn't come. She said you were good." Brooke's eyes burned. He took the photo with shaking hands and stared at it. It was from 5 years ago, a picture he had never given anyone. Aroshi must have taken it secretly. By now, Clara had caught up, panting. I'm so sorry," she stammered. "They just ran off." "I didn't know what." Brooke stood, his hands still on the girls. "Who are they?" he asked sharply, but his voice wavered. Clara looked confused, then slowly nodded toward them. "They're Lena and Bina, twin daughters of a woman named Aroshi. She's in custody." The name hit him like a cannon to the chest. "Aroshi?" he whispered. "Where is she? What do you mean custody?" The girls looked up at him, clinging to him now. "Nana Stella said mean things. Mommy called you. Then the police took her. She didn't steal. She's good. She sews dresses and tells stories and never cries in front of us." Brooke staggered backward. The puzzle pieces in his mind, long scattered, dusty with disbelief, suddenly crashed into place. The call he never received, the silence that followed, the unanswered questions, his mother's dismissive deflections, all the signs he missed. She called me?" he asked, more to himself than anyone. Bina nodded. "But your mom answered. Mommy was scared after that. Then she was gone." Brooke's hands curled into fists, his heart pounding with something far greater than confusion now. Fury, regret, grief. He turned to his lawyer. "Cancel the hearing. Now I want everything dropped. We're going to the station." The next hours unraveled like threads soaked in fire. Brooke's name alone opened doors. Within an hour, they had located the records, the false theft report, the shady arrest, the delayed trial. When Brooke read the accusation, his face turned stone cold. "My mother filed this," he demanded. The answer was yes. The evidence? None. Just hearsay and signatures bought by power. As the police reopened the file under Brooke's pressure, he turned to Clara and the twins. "Take them home. I'll bring her back." At the women's correctional facility, Brooke's presence caused a stir. He didn't wait for protocol. He stormed through the process with eyes blazing. When the cell door opened and Aroshi saw him standing there, she didn't move. She thought she was hallucinating. Her voice broke when she finally said, "Brooke?" He took a step inside, his heart breaking at the sight of her pale face. Her lips chapped, her eyes hollowed by nights without sleep. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. "Why did you let me believe you left?" Oroshi stood, her chains clinking softly. "Because I tried." And she answered. She said she'd destroy me. I didn't want our babies to suffer. Brooke's face crumpled, tears threatening. "They found me. They called me Daddy." And with those words, years of pain dissolved into silence between them, not healing, not forgiveness, but the beginning of truth. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, tightly, protectively. "I'm taking you home," he whispered. "This ends now." Brooke's grip on Orochi didn't loosen, not even as the cold metal of her handcuffs pressed against his chest. He held her as if letting go meant losing her again, as if the years of silence, pain, and unanswered questions could finally collapse into this one human embrace. His mind swirled violently with everything the last few hours had unveiled, the way his daughters had run to him with innocent faith, their small voices breaking through walls built by lies, the devastating realization that Orochi had never left him willingly, and the horrifying truth that his own mother had orchestrated the cruel removal of his wife from his life. His pulse thundered as he gently stepped back to look at her, brushing her tangled hair behind her ear with shaking fingers, noticing how prison had not just dulled her beauty, but buried it beneath exhaustion and despair. "I'm sorry," he said under his breath, his voice broken and hoarse, the words barely escaping his lips. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I should have known. I should have found you." Oroshi's lips trembled as she blinked, back tears that had threatened to fall for years. "I thought of you every night," she whispered. "But I was so scared, Brooke. Not for me. For our daughters. I didn't know how powerful Stella had become in your absence. She said she would hurt them if I ever came near you again." Brooke's chest rose and fell sharply. "She threatened the twins?" he asked, his voice low, heavy with restrained fury. Orochi nodded. "I didn't even have a picture of them until they were 2 months old," she admitted softly. "I had no phone, no money. Nothing but my memory of your smile and the promise I made to protect them." Brooke turned toward the prison guard outside the cell door. "Get her out," he ordered sharply. "Now. I'll handle whatever needs to be signed. She's not staying another night here." The guard hesitated for a moment, recognizing Brooke Carter not just as the billionaire whose face often graced magazines, but now as a man brimming with silent rage and desperation. "Sir, the formal process—" "I said now," Brooke snapped, and the authority in his tone was absolute. Within 20 minutes, Brooke had used every connection, every legal string available to him to push her release. Papers moved fast when money, power, and truth collided in one storm, and as Arashi stepped out of the detention area, blinking against the blinding light of the afternoon sun, Brooke was there, waiting like he always should have been. He draped his coat over her frail shoulders, shielding her from the world. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," he said softly. "Our daughters are waiting." The drive back wasn't filled with words. Instead, Brooke occasionally glanced at her through the rearview mirror, memorizing the lines of her face again, the small scar above her brow she got from rushing through the shelter's kitchen one night, the way her hands nervously twisted his coat sleeve like it was her anchor to reality. Orochi looked out the window, her mind racing faster than the car, remembering the moments she feared this day would never come. When they arrived at the shelter, Lena and Bina were sitting near the steps, drawing with crayons. As the car door opened and Orochi stepped out, both girls stood slowly. Their eyes widened. "Mommy?" Bina whispered. Orochi dropped to her knees and opened her arms as tears spilled down her face. "My babies!" she cried, The twins ran into her arms, sobbing with joy, their small bodies pressing tightly against hers. Brooke watched, silent, the sting in his eyes blurring the reunion before him. Something cracked inside him then, something frozen and dormant for years. Guilt flooded his veins like fire, but alongside it came something unfamiliar, something he had pushed aside after she vanished. Hope. Slowly he walked forward and knelt beside them. Oroshi looked at him, unsure, but he gently placed a hand on each of the girls' backs and whispered, "Can I join?" Lena nodded, pulling him in without hesitation, and for the first time in years, a broken family found its heartbeat again. Inside the shelter, Sister Helen watched from a distance, her lips trembling with gratitude. She'd carried their story close to her chest for years, never giving up hope that one day fate would turn. Brooke insisted they stay at a five-star hotel that night, not just to get them warm showers, clean clothes, and good food, but because he needed them near, needed to keep his eyes on Oroshi and the girls, to make sure this wasn't a dream ready to slip away. As the girls splashed in the bath, laughing for the first time in what felt like centuries, Oroshi stood by the window, wrapped in a soft robe, watching the city lights. Brooke approached quietly, holding a cup of warm tea. "They're beautiful," he said, "just like their mother." Oroshi turned her face away, tears threatening again. "I didn't want them to grow up hating you," she said, "so I made sure they loved your stories, your picture. I told them you were kind, even when I wasn't sure anymore." Brooke swallowed hard, pain etched across his face. "I deserved their hate. I failed you. I let her lie to me." "You didn't know," Oroshi said gently, "and when you did, you came." They sat together on the edge of the bed, the night wrapping around them like a fragile blanket. Brooke looked at her hands, still calloused from years of labor. He reached out slowly and held them. "I don't care what it takes," he said. "I'm making this right, not just for today, for all the days you spent alone, for every night I didn't know our daughters existed, for the way you suffered in silence. I'm going to fight, Oroshi, and I won't stop." Her eyes softened, unsure if she was strong enough to believe him yet, but unable to deny the truth in his voice. That night, as the twins slept between them on the king-sized bed, their small arms wrapped around their parents, Oroshi watched Brooke in the dim light. He didn't sleep. He just watched them all as if trying to etch this moment into his soul. Slowly she reached out and placed her hand on his. "I missed you," she whispered. Brooke turned, his expression melting. "I never stopped missing you," he replied, voice cracking. Silence held them, warm and close. And in that quiet space, something impossible happened. Brooke Carter's frozen heart, hardened by years of confusion, betrayal, and pain, began to melt. Not in grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but in the simplicity of holding the family he never knew he had, and the woman he never stopped loving. It was the first step in a long road ahead, but tonight they had found each other again, and that was the miracle. The next morning arrived with a heaviness that pressed down on Brooke's chest like an anvil. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. The moment the first light cracked across the skyline, he had already made the call to arrange an official, private visit to the jail to confront the nightmare that had stolen 4 years from his life, from Oroshi's life, from the childhood of the daughters he never knew he had. As he stood alone in the echoing, grim hallway of the city jail's visiting area, the sterile hum of flickering lights above did little to calm the storm inside him. The officer on duty nodded respectfully, opened the steel door with a loud clank, and gestured for him to enter. Brooke's heart thundered in his chest as he walked inside the cold, square room with its hard chairs and scratched-up metal table, everything about it screaming of stories, silenced and pain forced into shadows. He stood there, frozen, staring at the door opposite, the one from which she would appear, and time stretched as memories came flooding in. Hiroshi's laugh in the mornings, her way of squeezing his hand 3 times when she was scared but trying to be strong, the softness of her voice calling his name after a long day. The door opened, and when she stepped inside, Brooke's breath caught in his throat. Hiroshi wore a simple gray prison uniform, her hair tied back messily, her face thinner, her frame smaller than he remembered. But her eyes, though ringed with exhaustion and dulled by suffering, still held that same unbroken fire, that quiet strength that had once drawn him in like gravity. She paused as she saw him, and for a second her knees buckled slightly, the weight of his presence after years of exile knocking the breath out of her lungs. She had imagined this moment in so many ways, some filled with rage, others with begging, but never like this, never with him standing there silently, his blue eyes drowning in sorrow. Brooke couldn't speak. He couldn't move. It was as if the words had tangled themselves into a knot at the base of his throat, refusing to come out unless she pulled them free. Hiroshi took one cautious step forward, her chained hands trembling in front of her as she whispered, "Why are you here?" Her voice cracked like a violin string stretched too far, too tight, for too long. Brooke blinked, startled by the question, but before he could answer, she began to cry. Not loud sobs, not desperate wails, but silent, crumbling tears that fell like rain from a sky too tired to thunder. "I didn't do anything," she said. "I never left you. I never wanted to leave you. Your mother, she, Brooke, she came into our room the day you left for Paris and told me I was filth, that I didn't belong in your world. I was 2 months pregnant. I told her, I begged her." Her voice shattered under the weight of the truth she had buried for 4 long years. Brooke slowly walked to the glass wall where the narrow opening allowed hands to touch. He didn't sit. He didn't blink. His breathing grew shallow as he absorbed every syllable, every memory she poured out of herself, like blood from an open wound. "She said if I ever told you, she'd make the baby disappear," Hiroshi whispered, "and I believed her, because I'd seen the power she had. She had me thrown out while I was bleeding. I had nothing, nothing but them, and I lived with the fear that if I spoke, she would find them and take them." Brooke slowly sank to the ground, like a tree cut from its roots, his body too weak to carry the agony inside. His palms hit the cold cement floor as his body shook with emotion he could no longer contain. His shoulders trembled, his breath hitched, and then came the sobs, raw, aching, from the depth of a man who had just realized that the very foundation of his life had been built on betrayal and his mother's merciless lies. Hiroshi pressed her forehead to the thick glass between them. "I used to dream you'd find me," she whispered. "That maybe someday you'd see the twins, and know." Brooke looked up at her, tears dripping freely from his chin. "The twins," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They're mine." She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes," she said softly. "Lena and Bina. They are yours, Brooke, from the moment they opened their eyes." Brooke lifted his hands and placed them against the small glass opening, reaching for her fingers. Her chained wrists trembled as she slid her fingers through, their skin barely grazing, but the contact sent a bolt of electricity through both of them. "I failed you," he said, his voice hollow with guilt. "I failed you so badly. I should have looked harder. I should have trusted my heart. I should have known my mother." But his words broke again as he pressed his forehead to the glass. Hiroshi didn't respond with bitterness. Instead, she gently touched her forehead to the glass where his rested and whispered, "You didn't know, Brooke. And maybe you weren't ready to believe the worst of the woman who raised you, but now you do. That matters." Brooke shook his head slowly. "It doesn't matter until you're out, until you're home, with me, with our daughters." His voice hardened. I'll burn down everything to make that happen. I swear on their names." A guard knocked on the door to signal the end of visiting time, but Brooke stood tall again, eyes blazing with purpose. "I'm getting you out," he promised. "Tonight. No delays. I've already summoned the best lawyers. I don't care what it takes." As the guards led Orochi away, her eyes locked onto his. No words were exchanged, but the message passed between them was undeniable. After years of betrayal, silence, and darkness, love had not died. It had only waited, quietly, painfully, faithfully, for this moment to breathe again. Brooke exited the jail with fire in his veins and war in his soul. The woman he loved was caged for a crime she didn't commit. His mother, whom he once respected, was the architect of the nightmare that nearly destroyed them. But not anymore. It was time to fight, not just with wealth, but with truth. For the woman who bore his daughters in silence, for the childhood stolen from Lena and Bina, and for every tear that had fallen behind those bars. Brooke stepped out of the jail as though reborn, not into peace but into a storm, a hurricane that had been quietly forming in the pit of his soul for 4 endless years, now crashing into full fury with every step he took toward the place he once called home, but now saw as a cage built by deceit, betrayal, and cruelty. The luxury car he sat in felt suffocating, despite its leather and silence, and as he gripped the steering wheel tighter than ever before, his knuckles turned bone white, matching the boiling rage that coursed through every vein in his body. His jaw clenched, and his eyes, which once sparkled with calm confidence, were now dark and burning with a fire that refused to die until justice was not only served but screamed. He didn't wait for the chauffeur or the security team. He drove himself, needing to feel the control that had been stolen from him, needing to chase the truth down with his own hands. As the iron gates of the Carter mansion slowly creaked open, he didn't slow down. The car jerked to a halt just inches from the grand steps, and without bothering to remove the keys or shut the door, Brooke jumped out, slamming the door with a force that echoed across the sprawling driveway and into the corridors of the mansion where betrayal slept. Inside, Stella Carter was sipping tea, dressed immaculately in an ivory silk robe, her silver earrings catching the light as if nothing had ever gone wrong in her carefully ordered universe. She looked up, mildly surprised at the loud entrance, and when she saw Brooke standing in the hallway with fire in his eyes, she calmly placed the teacup back on its porcelain plate, like a queen about to entertain a disobedient subject. "You're home early," she said coldly, but Brooke didn't respond. His breath came hard, his fists were clenched, and then the silence shattered. "What did you do to her?" he roared, his voice ricocheting through every marble wall, every chandelier-lit corner of the house that had once shielded lies in shadows. Stella flinched, not visibly, but inside. She stood slowly, feigning grace, feigning confusion. "Brooke, I don't know what nonsense you're referring to, but—" "No!" he shouted, louder this time, his finger pointed at her like a weapon. "Don't you dare lie to me again. Not this time. I saw her. In jail. Do you know what it feels like to see the woman you love behind bars while you sit here surrounded by servants and sipping tea like you haven't burned every inch of my life to the ground?" His voice cracked at the end, not from weakness but from heartbreak, too deep to stay buried. Stella's lips tightened. "She was never right for you," she said coolly, but Brooke's laughter cut her like glass. "Not right for me. She was the only right thing in my life. You," he gasped as he pulled out the folded photographs from his pocket, hands trembling as he threw them on the glass coffee table between them. "Look at them," he screamed. "Your granddaughters, Lena and Bina. My daughters. You stole 4 years of their lives from me. 4 birthdays I missed. First steps. First words. Do you know they recognized me before I even said a word? Because she told them about me every night. She showed them my photo. She never gave up on me. She protected them. From you. Stella's face froze, the blood draining from her already pale complexion, but her pride refused to bend. "You're being dramatic," she said. "I did what I had to do to protect you, from her manipulation, from her—" "Stop," Brooke growled. "No more of your twisted justification. I trusted you with my heart. I believed you when you told me she abandoned me. I blamed myself for loving her. I buried my pain in work, in silence, in guilt. And all this time you were the monster, hiding in the light." He stepped closer, towering over her now, and for the first time in his life, Stella Carter looked small. "You broke her. You tried to break me. But you didn't destroy her, and you will never have another chance. I will fix this. I will bring her home. I will be the father to my daughters you tried to steal from them. And you," his voice shook with the power of truth, "you will never again hold a place in my heart or in my family." Stella's lips parted to respond, but he didn't wait. He turned sharply, heading for the door. "Brooke," she called after him, her voice for once unsteady, almost desperate. "I am still your mother." He stopped at the threshold, shoulders stiff, back turned to the woman who gave him life but shattered his world. He stood there in silence for a beat too long, and when he finally spoke, his words were cold and final. "Number, you're not. You lost that title the day you chose control over love, lies over truth, and pride over your own son's happiness. I don't know what you are now, but you're no mother of mine." With that, he walked out, leaving behind the polished floors, the golden walls, and the woman who once ruled it all like a queen. The moment the door slammed shut, it was as if the mansion itself sighed in surrender, the echoes of his fury still reverberating through the walls. Stella slumped back into her chair, for the first time in years feeling the bitter sting of shame begin to seep into her bones. She looked down at the photographs Brooke had left behind, two little girls, smiling, radiant, their eyes identical to his, their faces glowing with innocence she had tried to erase. Her hands trembled as she touched the edge of one picture, but it was too late. The damage was done. Her kingdom of pride had begun to crumble, and outside Brooke stood in the blazing sunlight, his eyes wet, his hands clenched, but his heart resolute. For the first time in years he knew exactly who he was, and exactly what he had to do next. The sunlight glinted off Brooke's tailored blazer as he stepped back into his car with fire still pulsing in his chest. Not the rage of betrayal this time, but a determination so fierce it made his every movement purposeful, precise, unshakable. His hands no longer trembled with pain, but with urgency, with the weight of a promise to undo the unthinkable. He sped toward the city's central jail, this time not in confusion or heartbreak, but as a man on a mission who had found clarity through agony. His phone rang constantly, his assistant, his legal team, even city officials he hadn't spoken to in months, but he dismissed them all, directing every ounce of his influence into one singular goal: Aroshi's release. Within hours, the Carter name that once oppressed her now worked to free her. Lawyers swarmed the courthouse, bail was posted, files were unearthed and shredded in courtrooms, and by sunset, the gates to the detention center creaked open for the woman who had waited 4 long years behind metaphorical and literal bars. Aroshi stepped out slowly, clutching her worn shawl, her eyes adjusting to the amber sky, unaware that the moment she passed those gates, the world as she knew it would transform forever. Brooke stood waiting on the stone steps with a trembling heart, wearing a black suit that hugged his frame, and eyes red-rimmed with sleepless nights and tears dried too long. When she saw him, really saw him this time, standing there not in disbelief but in devotion, her steps faltered, lips parting in hesitation. But before a word could form, he crossed the distance, wrapped his arms around her fragile frame, and pulled her into a hug so deep, so complete, it made time pause. His hand slid to the back of her head as he buried his face in her hair, whispering with a voice full of tremor, "Never again, never again will I let anyone take you from me." Oroshi clutched the front of his jacket as if to confirm it wasn't a dream, her body melting into his warmth, her cheeks wet with tears that had waited years to fall in the safety of love. Reporters stood in awe, camera lenses trembling, but Brooke didn't care. Let the world watch. Let them witness what regret looked like, what real love looked like after surviving a storm designed to destroy it. As they stepped into his car, he didn't take her to the mansion where pain still lingered in the walls. Instead, he turned the wheel toward the hills, where a hidden estate awaited, one he had purchased hours after seeing his daughters for the first time. He hadn't just bought a house, he had created a sanctuary, a world made of soft light, white velvet drapes fluttering in the breeze, and walls painted in warm hues that spoke of peace. The entrance alone bloomed with wild roses and jasmine vines that curled toward the sky like prayers of freedom. The garden had a stone path just perfect for two little girls to skip through, and at the far end stood a wooden swing beneath an archway of fairy lights. Brooke carried her through the front door, not out of tradition but out of reverence. "This is your palace," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear. "You are my queen." Oroshi gasped as her eyes took in the golden chandelier twinkling above, the soft piano music echoing from invisible speakers, the scent of vanilla and lavender flowing through every air vent. Her hands shook as she stepped forward, brushing her fingers against the walls as if afraid everything would vanish. Brooke followed close behind, guiding her gently from room to room, the nursery now transformed into a princess-themed suite for the twins, their names etched in gold above their beds, a sunroom where Oroshi could read or rest, a walk-in closet filled with clothes chosen by stylists, but approved by Brooke, who still remembered her favorite colors, patterns, and even her preference for silk over cotton. "This is your world now," he murmured, leading her into the master bedroom with a four-poster bed dressed in ivory linens. "And I'll spend every day proving you belong here." As she turned to face him, her lip quivered and tears spilled again. But this time they weren't of sorrow, they were of healing. Brooke knelt down slowly, not caring if his knees hit the marble floor, and took her trembling hands in his. "I don't deserve it," he began, voice barely above a whisper. "But I beg you, please forgive me. I was blind, and I let silence become my truth. I let her lies grow like poison while you suffered alone. I failed you. I failed them. But I swear to you, Orochi, I will never fail again." His eyes searched hers, pleading, promising, praying. "Let me start over. Let me love you the way I should have from the start. Let me be your husband, your protector, your partner. Let me be the father they deserve." Orochi collapsed into his arms, burying her face in his chest as sobs racked through her shoulders, not from weakness but from release, from finally knowing that the man she once loved so deeply had returned to her not just in body but in soul. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered against his chest, "even when I was alone, even when I thought you forgot me. I never hated you. I just missed you." Brooke tightened his grip around her, his lips pressed to her forehead, breathing in her presence like air he'd been denied. Hours passed in that embrace before they even noticed the twins had arrived, their laughter ringing through the halls like bells chasing away every ghost that once lived in the shadows of their lives. Lena and Bina ran in and threw themselves into their mother's lap and their father's arms, and in that living room, drenched in soft gold and fresh roses, a family that had been torn apart was sewn back together, not with stitches, but with sacred threads of truth, tears, and love. That night, as the moonlight poured through the wide windows and the curtains danced in the breeze, Orochi stood in the garden wearing a dress Brooke had chosen, a soft peach gown that caught the light of the stars. He joined her silently, sliding his arm around her waist as they watched the twins fall asleep through the glass doors. "You brought me home like a queen," she whispered, tilting her head against his shoulder. Brooke kissed her temple gently. "Because you are one," he said. "And from now on, every morning you wake in this house, every night you close your eyes beside me, I'll remind you until you believe it with every breath." In that moment, wrapped in love under the stars, Orochi finally believed it. The wind outside was gentle, whispering through the tall trees that stood like silent sentinels around the estate. But within the walls of the home where love had finally returned, time slowed to a sacred stillness. After tucking Lena and Bina into their princess beds draped in soft lilac netting, Brooke turned off the fairy lights one by one, pausing at the doorway to watch them sleep. Peacefully, safely, with their mother just down the hall and their father now a protector, not a phantom. As he walked back into the master suite, the scent of warm vanilla lingered in the air, wrapping around him like a memory finally made real. Orochi stood by the open window in a satin robe the color of moonlight, her silhouette glowing softly under the chandelier. She turned slowly when she heard him approach, her eyes tender, lashes still moist from the tears she had shed while watching their daughters drift to sleep. Brooke didn't speak at first. He simply walked to her, his hand brushing gently against hers, and the silence between them grew louder than any words could hold. He took her hand and led her to the center of the room, where the moon spilled across the silk sheets of their bed, where shadows swayed like poetry on the walls. He cupped her cheek with one hand, the pad of his thumb brushing her skin so reverently, as if afraid she'd disappear if he blinked too long. Her breath caught as his forehead rested against hers, and they stood like that for a moment, hearts beating like thunder under trembling skin, eyes closed as if breathing in each other's soul. Then, with a gentleness born only from pain and healing, he whispered, "Can I touch you again? Not just your body, but everything I once lost. Your breath, your truth, your soul." Orochi, speechless, nodded with tear-brimmed eyes, her fingers clutching the edge of his shirt, like a woman desperate not to wake from a dream. He kissed her, not with hunger, but with grief and longing, with apologies that couldn't fit into sentences, with love so intense it could have broken glass. Each press of his lips carried the weight of 4 missing birthdays, each caress a rewriting of the nights she had cried alone. He removed her robe with a reverence reserved for royalty, his hands memorizing the skin he once worshipped, but now cherished with sacred humility. Her back arched beneath his touch, not from passion alone, but from recognition, like her body remembered him, even when her heart had tried to forget. And when she undressed him slowly, her fingertips traced the curve of his jaw, the lines of his chest, the scars life had left on both of them. "I'm not the same man," he whispered as she explored his body, "but I want to be worthy again. Teach me." She didn't speak. She simply kissed him again, and their lips said everything. They made love slowly, deeply, in silence at first, as if every motion was a prayer. His hands mapped her skin with devotion, rediscovering the valleys and hollows of the woman who once made his soul rise like dawn. Her legs wrapped around him as if anchoring herself to something that had once been lost at sea, her breath shaky but trusting. He whispered her name over and over like an incantation, as if grounding himself in the only truth that mattered. "Orochi, my love, my life." Every kiss pressed against her collarbone, every nuzzle into her neck, every tear that slid from his lashes to her chest told her he wasn't just touching her body. He was rebuilding her trust, one heartbeat at a time. She forgave him in gasps, in soft moans, in fingers tangled in his hair and nails against his back. She forgave him with her tears that kissed his cheeks as she whispered, "I missed you, Brooke. I missed you so much." and he trembled at the sound, burying himself deeper into her embrace. The sheets twisted around them like vines of destiny, binding two souls who had been torn apart by lies, now held together by love that refused to die. When they reached that quiet, burning height together, it wasn't release they felt. It was resurrection. Afterward, the room glowed not from chandeliers, but from the warmth that filled the silence. Brooke lay on his side, one arm under Aroshi's head, the other wrapped firmly around her waist, holding her as if letting go would break the spell. Her cheek rested against his bare chest, where she listened to the rhythmic thrum of a heart she once thought she'd never hear again. Neither of them spoke for a while, both drifting in that delicate space where love had mended wounds too deep for doctors, too sacred for words. Outside, stars blinked softly through the clouds, as if witnessing something divine. At some point in the night, Lena stumbled into the room with sleepy eyes, then Bina shortly after, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Without a word, Brooke pulled back the covers and opened his arms. The twins crawled in, one nestling between them, and the other curling against Aroshi's side. For the first time in 4 endless years, they lay under the same roof, under the same blanket, as a family finally whole again. The bed, once cold and king-sized, now overflowed with limbs tangled in love, tiny hands on shoulders, a soft head on a father's arm, a mother's smile in the dark. Brooke kissed each of their foreheads before whispering into Aroshi's ear. This is what forever should have always looked like. She reached across their daughters to brush her fingers against his cheek, her eyes reflecting moonlight and emotion. Then, "Let's never waste another day," she whispered back. As the clock ticked softly and the wind quieted outside, Brooke felt something he hadn't known for years. Peace, deep and unconditional. A peace that could only come from truth revealed, wounds acknowledged, and love fiercely chosen. And in that room, surrounded by the heartbeats he'd nearly lost, he made a vow, not just to protect them, but to cherish them with the kind of love that never fades, no matter how dark the storms. That night didn't just bring them together, it healed them. And for the first time in years, sleep came to them not as an escape, but as a sanctuary, wrapped in silk, truth, forgiveness, and the powerful magic of a love that refused to die. Morning sunlight poured gently into the room, like a soft blessing from the heavens, stretching across the sheets, still warm from a night of healing and reunion. Aroshi stirred first, her eyes fluttering open to find her daughter's tiny forms nestled between her and Brooke, their peaceful faces a living reminder that life, even after storms, could offer back joy in double measure. Brooke's arm lay across Lena protectively, his hand unconsciously curled around Aroshi's fingers, as though even in his dreams he dared not let her go again. She watched him for a moment, the man who once vanished into silence now wrapped in the fabric of her restored world. Every line of his jaw, every breath he took was no longer laced with mystery, but bathed in love and redemption. By the time breakfast aromas began floating through the house, cinnamon, butter, warm bread, Brooke had awakened too, his first act being to kiss her forehead and softly murmur, "Let's begin again, in every way." He meant it. In the days that followed, Brooke didn't just pick up the pieces. He built an entirely new life designed not to correct the past, but to protect the future. The estate they had returned to became more than a house. It was a home now, colored by laughter echoing through corridors, the patter of twin feet racing down polished floors, the melody of Aroshi's hum as she sewed in her studio, overlooking a garden he'd filled with flowers in her name. But Aroshi didn't simply bask in happiness. She transformed her pain into purpose, using her story, her strength, and the fire that had once been nearly extinguished. She founded a haven for women like her, single mothers cast aside, betrayed, lost in shadows. The Aroshi Hope Foundation began with a small space and 10 women and quickly bloomed into a sanctuary of resources, shelter, legal aid, and above all, compassion. She visited daily, not just as a figurehead, but as a sister in resilience, holding hands, telling stories, showing others that survival was not the end. It could be the beginning of something radiant. Brooke stood beside her through it all, not as the CEO billionaire, but as her husband, quietly ensuring funding never ran dry, leveraging his influence to pull government eyes toward forgotten women, and watching with pride as the woman he nearly lost became a voice the city revered. Lena and Bina thrived in a prestigious private academy, wearing braids and books like crowns, their intellect sharp, their kindness inherited. They made friends easily, teachers adored them, and every afternoon they returned home to parents waiting with open arms and warm meals. Their home pulsed with rhythm. Brooke learned to cook pancakes on Sundays. Aroshi started painting again. Their bedroom remained a temple of affection and honesty. There were stolen kisses behind pantry doors, slow dances in the living room, family game nights, and evenings where the four simply cuddled on the couch watching cartoons, love stitched into every quiet moment. As for Stella, the echo of her name no longer caused tremors. Brooke had not spoken to her since that day of confrontation, and though she called, sent letters, even showed up at his office, he never allowed her past his walls again. The Carter mansion, once ruled by her iron pride, now stood cold and echoing, the servants long gone, the chandeliers collecting dust, and no footsteps in the long hallways. Stella's reflection grew lonelier by the day, her regret too bitter to swallow, but the door to reconciliation had closed with finality. Brooke's silence was not fueled by vengeance, but by protection. He would not allow even a whisper of that woman to darken what he had rebuilt. And it wasn't only his relationship with his mother that changed. Brooke Carter, once laser-focused on mergers and numbers, now spent half his days at home. He converted one wing of the house into an office, allowing him to work while being close to his girls. Business still soared, but it no longer defined him. His greatest title now was Daddy and Husband, and the way his eyes lit up each time Aroshi entered the room made it clear. His soul had finally found its home. On a golden evening 2 years later, Aroshi stood in the garden wearing a cream sundress, the breeze playing with the edges of her hair, her fingers tracing the petals of the roses Brooke had planted for her. Behind her, laughter erupted as Lena and Bina chased each other with paintbrushes, their canvases, abandoned for joy, their cheeks stained with color. Brooke approached from behind, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "This," he whispered, "is the life I prayed for even when I thought I didn't deserve it." Aroshi leaned into him, her hand gently stroking his. "This is the life we built," she corrected softly, "brick by brick, with truth, with tears, with forgiveness." They watched their daughters chase fireflies under the setting sun, the sky blushing in shades of coral and lavender, and the air filled with the music of belonging. As twilight deepened, candles lit around the garden, soft music played from a nearby speaker, and Brooke turned her toward him, holding her close. He didn't need to ask her to dance. Her body moved with his instinctively, the same way it always had, like two souls who knew each other in every life. Their movements were slow, steady, as if memorizing the moment forever. And in that dance there were no regrets, no shadows, only the purest form of love, the kind that survives, heals, and blooms again. The world outside continued as it always had. News cycles spun, cities bustled, storms came and went. But within the walls of their world there was peace. Aroshi's name grew across headlines as a beacon of hope. Brooke's empire became known not just for wealth, but philanthropy, and Lena and Bina began dreaming big. One wanted to write books, the other to become a judge. They spoke often of fairness, of kindness, and when people asked about their mother, they said she was the strongest woman they knew. When people asked about their father, they smiled wide and said, "He's the one who made everything whole." And when people asked Aroshi and Brooke how they had survived so much pain and still found love again, they simply looked at each other and answered in unison, "Because we never gave up on us." In the end, theirs wasn't just a story of loss or betrayal. It was a story of rising, of rebuilding, of turning every scar into art, every tear into a river that led them back to each other. And every night before bed, Brooke kissed his daughters good night, kissed Aroshi longer, held her close in the dark, and whispered the same words into her hair. "You are my beginning and my forever." And she, smiling with all the light of a healed heart, whispered back, "And you are my home." The story closed not with the sound of pain, but with a soft lullaby of peace, echoing through a house no longer wounded, but beautifully alive, with laughter, with second chances, with the endless miracle of a love that was always meant to be.